So I just laid this sketch in. I start from the beginning with paint. So if I was working through a painting, generally I'll go to the site. I'll take a lot of photos, not 10 or 12, but 30, 40, 50 photos. I came back, I sort of sorted some photos I like. I'd done some loose sketches when I was there. I picked some other possibilities for color. I used those sketches that I'd done on place plus the photos to lay a sketch in on the canvas. So I'm working on a small canvas. I put an orange ground down, which is the base color. I prefer a saturated ground. And then I laid the sketch in paint. So since I've already done some iterations that I'm familiar or feel familiar with that composition, that enabled me to go right in with paint. So now I have just this basic sketch in place. I'm going to go with summer. The majority of images I had for this place were either full summer foliage, winter with snow, or autumn. So it's a place that I've gone with some frequency and I feel very comfortable. I'm going to just stick with the summer palette. So this orange is a nice base because the summer palette is going to lean into greens. The orange is the opposite spectrally, which means I am dealing with the complement. And the complement always creates some kind of vibrancy because technically your eyes are perceiving the entire color palette. So I'm just squeezing some, this is acrylic without any pigment in it. On my palette, I have a lot of puddles of glazing liquid, which is similar to the medium. The difference is if I use the glazing liquid, it slows down the entire drying process. So I go between those depending on what it is I'm trying to achieve. I'm early enough in the process that I'm not going to worry much about trying to do slow drying time. So I'm going to just start to set in where I know there's going to be this brilliant light that is more towards the back. And since I have that light mixed, I'm going to just begin. And this movement I'm doing is called scumbling. So I'm just suggesting, I'm not painting that whole area out, but I'm suggesting, and I'm not worrying about the fact that I'm painting over some of that sketch I put in place because acrylic is self-covering. And the method I use, glazing, layered method that was developed during the Renaissance, I'm not going to get all bent out of shape trying to preserve that first layer, the sketch. The sketch just gave me a framework. So now I'm going to just, I'm looking at that color reference from the photo, and I'm just setting some of that color in place. Okay, so, and then while I have that green out, I'm going to move to the side. I've tinted it, meaning I've added white. Anytime you add white or black, you're desaturating. You're reducing the color intensity. So I'm now mixing more blue in and making that a darker version of green because I want it to feel more organic. I tend to use ink. I don't use black. So ink is a nice way to create. It's organic, it's transparent. So I can get a kind of green that to me feels much more natural. I'll put a tiny bit of orange in there with the green because that's another way that you desaturate color, meaning you're putting a tiny bit of its complement in, which neutralizes some of the intensity of the color. So now I've got this darker, and I'm not loving that color at all. So I'm going to pull more yellow into it, and I'm using a cadmium yellow dark. but I don't want it to feel quite as artificial as that felt. So, better. So now I'm going to lay just what I know are going to be some of the darker greens down in the understory. Once again, I'm not getting very stressed out. I'm not trying to finish the painting in this first round. So I'm just getting some base color. Sometimes you'll hear it referred to as massing in, establishing where the masses of volume are going to be. And as I said, I'm not trying to finish the painting. So scumble a little bit of this around. Knowing that I am going to be working in this for a while. I like the entire process. So I'm not trying to finish a painting. I'm not doing any of the sort of speed painting thing. I'm not doing plein air, which in its truest sense aim to always work during the same lighting effect because you were trying to capture a very, very specific light. So if it took you 3 days working for 45 minutes, during which time that specific lighting effect happened, that's how you finish the painting. So I'm working in a method that was sort of the most traditional method for a very long time. And that is you draw your reference from being on site, but you go back and you do the work itself on, usually, I mean, in the most traditional, you did small studies on site. You did your actual sort of large scale canvas back in your studio. So now I've got some color masked in there. I'm not worrying again about trying to finish this painting. I'd roughed in some base color. I'm going to take the color that's still active on my palette that I was using when I laid in the sketch just before I turned on this camera, and add a little bit more of the acrylic polymer medium, meaning the one that thins it but continues to dry pretty fast. And all I'm going to do now is I'm going to play around a little bit with my drawing. So I'm looking at both my winter, my fall, and my summer picture. Just helps me to figure out some of the bones of what's going on in that scene. And then all I'm doing is going through and just adding very loosely, sort of redefining some of the parts of my drawing itself. And there's going to be so much happening. This is all root and wood that has collected from various times when this particular bank would have been catching debris during heavy rains. Back here to these back shores, which give me that great depth. And I'm just going to begin to suggest what I know will be cast shadows. And all I'm doing is I'm just very loosely beginning to suggest what I know will be a great deal of shadow over in this left side pool where the heavy foliage is blocking a considerable amount of the sun. So you're seeing reflected trunks, but they're sort of lost within the mass of the reflections of all of the foliage. Like I said, I'm not trying to finish the painting. I tend to go through and I'll work some of those details in advance. I know I want a lot of reflection down there. Let me turn my little timer off. So I set a timer just because I was sort of guessing about where I would be as I got the whole canvas sort of wet with this first round. So all I'm doing is I've got a nice neutral, and I added a little bit of blue to it. So I'm going to just pull that through because I know I'm going to have heavy shadow coming from that bank. I'm looking at my references and I see, so the shadows sort of come across. All I'm doing is just like I had done in the forest, just getting some basic value down. It's going to help me when I come back in for my sort of second round of this piece. Down here, it's definitely dark. So this is sort of going to be one of the last things I do. And then I'm going to give it a little bit of time to dry. It's acrylic. So the difference is acrylic is polymer as the suspension, that which is holding the pigment. So it dries faster than oil-based paints. And it's to the point now where there are water-based oils and there are chemical additives that make the oil paint or the acrylic paint act more like oil. So I'm sort of losing what used to be there's a strong professional, bit of a leery sort of attitude about acrylics. And I'm happy to say that seems to be waning dramatically because good pigment is good pigment and medium is medium. So at this point, I have this basic sketch in place. And here, let me get a little bit of better light on that. I don't have a professional recording environment, but hopefully you can get a sense of what now is a fairly dark underpainting. The parts are in place.